if you tell me like, oh, I like you, you were very nice, I'm not gonna believe you. And I don't know why. I don't know why, but it's like there's something in my head that goes, that can't be right. Like, look at all your faults.
Do you feel you've experienced emotional abuse?
Yes. Professionally, I haven't been told like, oh yes, you have been emotionally abused, but I feel like stuff I've read about it, it kind of matches up to mine.
I think it's important to first define something. Basically, in some ways, it would be any sort of interpersonal abuse that is not covered by physical abuse or sexual abuse.
It's not as straightforward as something like a broken leg or someone undergoing physical harm, but it's just as common and just as severe.
So the first time that I started to experience emotional abuse, it was right after my parents separated, and I was being forced to go on visits with my biological father. He started saying things to me like, you are the reason that this relationship isn't working. You are the reason why my other relationships, like with my brother and my sister, aren't working, and just made me feel really guilty.
My parents divorced, and then we moved into an apartment with my mom. And I think that's where some of the emotional abuse began. It was talking to me about how bad my dad was and talking to me about how I should feel guilty for not being okay with her drinking alcohol.
There was this play, and it was, at the time, I was really scared of it, but he said I had to. So then I went, and I started crying in the middle of the play, and I was like, no, I need to go home, like right now. And he took me aside and basically just started saying how I was just being like a complete pansy. I need to suck it up, and that it wasn't that difficult, and that everyone else was enjoying it, so should I.
She'd yell at me for like thinking one way. I'm like, it's my thoughts, it's my opinions, what are you doing?
Just made me feel guilty about just who I was.
I remember one time in a car, we were driving to the store after we had just gone into an argument, and I was sitting in the passenger seat crying because I was still thinking about it and thinking about how what she was saying wasn't true, but how like I wasn't able to speak like what was true. And then she asked me like, hey, why are you upset? And like, I don't want to tell you because like you'll get mad at me. Like once I understood that concept, I was like, I'm not going to tell you because you'll get mad. And she's like, I don't care. If I get mad at you, you're going to tell me.
He would be making eggs in the kitchen, and I don't necessarily like eggs. I think they're actually really gross. And so I'd just be like, no, I don't want to eat this. I'll just eat something else. And he would say I had to eat these and that I was being stupid because I didn't want to eat something that he prepared for me, and that I was wasting food and I was wasting his time.
Like there is a fine line between like, oh, I'm being teenagery and angsty and actually being emotionally abused, and there is a line. So I think a lot of people dismiss it for like, oh, you're just feeling feelings and you'll be okay. It's just something that's happening. It's a season, it's a phase. I think emotional abuse doesn't really get acknowledged. It gets more dismissed as, oh, you're just feeling feelings and you're fine.
Those sort of things just made me feel really guilty, and not necessarily things you should feel guilty about.
A big part is really how we end up feeling about ourselves, right? The self-shame or irrational guilt. Because there's healthy guilt that we want to keep. If we do something, we behave badly, we make a mistake, we need to apologize and feel that's our conscience. But there's irrational guilt. There's a lot of times in a relationship where somebody is feeling guilty, but there's really no good reason to feel guilty.
She told me how bad my grandparents on my dad's side were, how bad Amy is, my stepmom, and she'd tell us like, oh, but I'm not trying to make him the bad guy. Like that was kind of crazy for me. I was like, but you are making him the bad guy. I got an email a little bit ago that said, I haven't hurt you as much as you've hurt me.
He would say things like, oh, you're not good enough, or why won't you love me, or like, you make me feel terrible about.
It's like a big game because it's like, I want to get you to do what I say. Oh, you're not taking me yelling at you? Okay, how about I apologize and make you feel better? Let's see what you do. They're moving things out of your way or into your way to see what you do in order to get what they want.
We've been in an abusive environment. Obviously, severe physical, sexual abuse is extremely impactful on people later on. But sometimes it's almost a little bit more insidious when it's emotional or psychological abuse. If there's severe physical abuse in a home, there's lots of external validation for that person. You know, there'll be social workers and teachers and lots of people saying, oh, this is horrible, you've had a horrible experience. But I think a lot of people grow up in environments where that's not the case. You know, they're provided for, but there's a bit of a psychological or an emotional abusive element to it. People tend to question themselves about it. You know, is this, I guess it's not so bad. All my friends think my parents are great. So they begin to blame themselves.
I didn't really understand what was going on, why he was saying all these incredibly abusive things to me. I didn't understand what was wrong with me. If there was something, I'll feel like, oh, was that really the right thing to do? Was running away really the answer?
My brain just goes, no, you are selfish, you are this, you are this. It gets overpowering sometimes. My brain starts to go, like, this is what you are. Throughout that time, I kind of felt like numb and dead inside. In a way, like I wanted to talk to friends, and I did, but then I felt like I kept saying the same thing to people, and that they didn't want to hear the same thing over and over. And doing that and keeping it all in kind of like chipped away at myself.
In my work, I come across even people in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and they're still sort of regenerating that sense of self from someone that was harmful. It doesn't happen overnight. You don't necessarily heal or bounce back from it overnight.
What are the effects of emotional or psychological abuse? Mental health issues like depression, anxiety, anger management issues, being assertive. People might be more passive and they let things build up and accumulate, and then it finally blows up in unhealthy ways, aggressively. Health issues, all the stress, the epidemic of stress that we know, gastrointestinal problems, acid reflux, ulcers long term. All of these things that when we're dealing with emotional distress and not having healthy ways of coping with it.
I often won't speak in large groups because I feel like no one wants to hear me. It also like can make me second guess how people actually feel about me. All the things that she said about me, and like, oh, well, if someone I cared about and who knew me very well could think that about me, then other people can definitely think that about me. I do often doubt like that people want to be friends with me, that people consider me their friends. I often doubt people actually think of me as nice and kind, which I think comes from my mom pointing out my faults often and my dad pointing out my faults often. Myself being included in things is hard for me to imagine that people actually want to include me in things.
The really obvious ones, the overt ones, are threats and intimidation and things like that, right? But the more subtle ones are jokes that are really hurtful under the guise that they're just kidding. Passive-aggressive behaviors.
I definitely look out for people who are passive-aggressive, because I really do think that's the start of emotional abuse.
It's a slippery slope that starts as maybe a partner joking about something about you, and then it just becomes more and more pointed over time, and it becomes more and more hurtful and harmful. So I think there's a lot of time where it's occurring, but people aren't actually reaching out. They're not going back to their friends or finding a counselor or going to a teacher.
I think repetitiveness is a big thing. In the past, she's texted me or emailed me like, oh, I'm so sorry. At first, I was like, okay, thank you like for saying that, and I'm really hoping that you're going to change like you said you were. Then she falls back into the cycle of being really, really crappy to me, and then she'll go to saying she's sorry and keep apologizing for the things that she's doing and saying that she won't do them again.
That's a way of kind of expressing anger without directly doing that. It can often be helpful for a friend to have a conversation with the person. You know, once they recognize it, being able to talk about it, have it validated that this is in fact a real thing. Yes, if it's physical abuse and you have a black eye, everybody knows it's a real thing. But emotional or psychological abuse, as we said, is a little bit more subtle.
My name's Jaaron Muters. I am one of the directors of the documentary. I don't feel I've experienced emotional abuse, no. My experiences with emotional abuse mainly stem from my friends' experiences with emotional abuse. They come to me quite often with their stories and how it makes them feel. I've seen it through the eyes of the people that I care about, and it's not pretty. I think emotional abuse is often overlooked and thought of as an overreaction. Like, when you hear a story from someone about how their parent may have yelled at them or guilt-tripped them, it feels like you can relate. It seems like something that you've gone through and something that you've gotten over. But when you live with that guilt constantly, years on end, it takes a toll on you. Eventually, it gets to the point where you don't need that other person to criticize you. You do it to yourself.
If I seem really, really off in a weird, numbish state, I'll say, like, I'm okay, but, like, on the inside, I'm, like, dying, like, keep asking, like, keep pursuing this. If you just ask me, then you're just asking and passing. If you ask me a second time, like, you actually care.
I think you'd watch for changes in how they connect to other people, changes into their sense of confidence and sense of self. And to be honest, the best thing you can do is stay attached, because they're going to need you sooner or later, and encourage them to talk to someone that's a professional.
Sometimes it takes a third party to be able to identify what they're seeing. What you can do is serve to validate that, you know, you're seeing some things that are actually quite disturbing and concerning for you. And sometimes that's maybe enough for that person to then begin to self-validate and say, yeah, I guess I've been feeling this way, but other people are seeing it too. So maybe it's actually okay for me to set some boundaries and, you know, look after myself.
If I knew someone was dealing with something like that, I would offer help. And honestly, I would just offer just being a friend, because often that's what people need more than advice. They just want someone to support them.
Starting the conversation is fantastic, because it is a slippery slope. It is slow and it is difficult to put your finger on sometimes. Sometimes it's just a gut feeling that something's not right when you're with your friend and you see them with their partner. And find your voice, because if you're seeing it, I guarantee they're feeling it.
People may think, well, I'm not suicidal or anything, and so, you know, why would I call a crisis line? You can call a crisis line for anything around this, and even emotional abuse. So the crisis line in BC is 1-800-SUICIDE, right? So it's 1-800-SUICIDE. But the other one, and a very easy resource to remember, is 211, right? Just like people call 911 or 411 for information, 211 is a resource. You can call that 24 hours a day, and the crisis line is 24 hours a day as well. Explain your situation. They then have resources to connect you to government, community resources. So it could be for physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, counseling service, but even things like the food bank or anything else. So basically, it's an excellent resource to remember. If you forget anything else, just 211.
Talk to your friends. Absolutely. Talk to your friends. They're brilliant. They'll know what to do. Talk to your school counselor. Talk to a parent. Find a clinical counselor in your area. There's so many resources available. Or at the very least, your own doctor can start you.
Make people feel valid. Like, I keep saying that, but it's really important. Make people feel, one, that they're loved, because emotional abuse can really damage, like, am I actually like a person worthy of being loved? Make sure that they know they're loved. Whatever way that either you or they want, show them that. Show them that love. Be there for whatever they need. Like, if they need a hug, or they need a distraction, or they need to just feel happy for 10 seconds, allow them that and give them that. Obviously, you can't be there 24/7 for what they need, and obviously you have your own problems and you have your own things that you're dealing with, but if someone is like sobbing, don't just like dismiss that. Like, go up to them. Hey, are you okay? How can I help? What can I do? Do you need a hug? Do you need someone to listen? Do you need advice? Do you need perspective? Like, what do you need that I can help you with?
Emotional abuse is more common than people realize, and it's a serious issue. Understanding what emotional abuse is and how you can help those who've experienced it is important. The more we talk about it and understand it, the more people will notice when they or someone they know is being abused. To anyone who is experiencing emotional abuse, there are people that want to help. There are people that want to support you and understand your situation better. You're not alone. And to those who may not understand emotional abuse on a personal level, be more observant. If you notice someone acting off, ask what's wrong and make it obvious that you genuinely care. because you could be the person they open up to. There's no expectation for you to fix their situation. You don't have to be their therapist. But having a person to talk to can change a person's life. And you can be that change. All you have to do is listen.